Today, we celebrate reaching the milestone of 500 episodes of The Voice of Leadership. And that's the show for corporate executives who appreciate a biblical perspective on life and leadership. I'm Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, your normal host, although today I am pleased to be a guest on my own show, and I'm double delighted to be interviewed by my dear colleague and friend, Chris Cooper from Leicestershire, England, in the UK. No stranger to podcasting, Chris Cooper founded the Business Elevation Show on Voice America in 2011, building a massive network of global connections and audiences in over 50 countries. He's the author of the book, The Power to Get Things Done, Whether You Feel Like It or Not, published by Penguin Random House USA. Chris is also the founder of the Elevation Collective, an exclusive network for business and world change makers. With more than 30 years of business experience as an advisor, coach, facilitator, and consultant to global brands, Chris consistently elevates business success and creates caring communities. Thank you, Chris, for being my guest host on The Voice of Leadership, and welcome back to the show because you were a guest also.
Thank you, Dr. Karen. What an absolute privilege to have this opportunity to spend some time with you on this incredible milestone. 500 episodes is something else, really is, to have that discipline and consistency to keep being curious and meeting new guests and sharing information and ideas and inspiration and thoughts with people. I know it comes very much from your heart as a very kind, wise, and caring leader. Dr. Karen Wilson Starks is the president and CEO of Trans Leadership Inc. She's the host of The Voice of Leadership, as you know. She's also author of Lead Yourself First. Is a fellow of the American Psychological Association and recipient of the RHR International Excellence in Consultation Award. Many of you will know Dr. Karen is a brilliant advisor, facilitator, coach, transformational culture expert with teams, etc. And I just want to share with you that a few weeks ago, I invited Dr. Karen to join me in Windsor near London, and I was facilitating the annual convention for an exceptional community of people that I've invited into the Elevation Collective community. And I asked Dr. Karen, would you do the honour of facilitating a session for us? And I have to be honest that I was in complete awe with the way that she facilitated. We have this very exclusive audience of people handpicked from the guests from my shows over 13 years. I brought together very wise, kind, accomplished people. And she quite honestly blew us all away by the very beautiful, eloquent, and clear way that she facilitated that session. And I have a few years myself, many years of facilitation under my belt, and I was learning from Dr. Karen. So I was really, really impressed. So let's move into an interview now to find out more about this experience and wisdom that you've gleaned, Dr. Karen, over 500 episodes now.
And Chris, I wanted to say first, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I really appreciate it. Thank you immensely.
You're very welcome. Thank you for yours. Let's go right back now. Let's go right back to the first episode. And I know we've also have Chad here who's working in the background, who's a wonderful man and also privileged to know Chad Barr, who helps with the show and provides all the support in the background and the vision, help you with the vision, etc. But I want you to think right back to that very first episode, and I'm intrigued to know what your vision was and how it's evolved over time.
Well, it's interesting because when I first started the podcast, Chris, I was thinking about several things. I thought to myself, well, this will be a wonderful opportunity to share some ideas and some thoughts on leadership that I've been curating for many, many years. I thought, okay, this will be a wonderful time to give visibility to the work that I'm doing, and also a great time, if you will, to attract maybe some new people into my orbit who didn't already exist in terms of people that I knew. That's what I thought I would be doing. And I said to Chad at the beginning, because he's the producer of the show, and I said to Chad, I said, what am I going to say? I really didn't think I would have enough to say for a podcast. And back in the early days, we did some short form podcasts. And as it turned out, we got to a point where he couldn't shut me up because I had plenty to say, but I was worried about not having enough to say at the beginning.
Yeah. And it's interesting when you start out, you have those nerves and that there's insecurity, but once you take the step and you've done a few shows, that dissipates, isn't it? It becomes more natural and
Well, I think for me, what was hard is that I'm used to public speaking. I'm used to being in front of audiences. That's not a problem. However, when you're doing a podcast, there is no live audience. You're speaking into the dark. I found that extremely difficult because I usually derive energy from the audience and then we do back and forth in a repartee. So that's what was hard for me.
and over that time, has the sort of the way you have formatted the show and structured it, has it changed? Has it evolved?
Oh, yes, it's changed and evolved in quite a few iterations over the years. When I first started the podcast, first of all, it was audio only. And it was of varying lengths. I might even have had a podcast that was 4 minutes long. And so they were all different lengths at the very beginning. And we also used to broadcast twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays. So over time, we made a number of changes. First of all, we shortened the programming time so it was once a week. We added a guest once a month. And then eventually we added two guests a month, which is where we are now. And we also changed the show in such a way that not only was it on the regular podcast channels, we also are on the television station and we're on iHeartRadio and YouTube, which meant we had to add video, which was a whole additional dimension of being ready for the
Yeah.
podcast. So that actually, it's even more of an effort, if you will. So we did that. And then we had to really lengthen the podcast for TV and iHeart because those formats and the channels that we are on required a 1 hour show. So now we had to upgrade so that the shows are 1 hour long, is what we did. And then we moved from doing like one set of show notes to really customizing the show notes for the 6 channels that we post on every week. We created a lot of assets for the guests, one of which is called Friday Strategies, which I absolutely love. It summarizes the main points of the show and it's displayed in a really beautiful graphic presentation that my staff does because I don't have the talent to do that, to make it into the graphic presentation. And it's either in a PDF on one page or in a format that they could also use on Instagram in 4 or 5 panels in that sense. So we've done all that, and we added also commercials for our nonprofit Christian guest. So if someone is the head of a major Christian nonprofit, we create commercials for them, and those run on guest episodes. And so those ministries get visibility all year long. That was our give back to that community.
Yeah. Sounds like you've been doing a lot of giving.
Yes, there's been a lot of giving involved.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And I'm really impressed with all the different formats that you've created over the years and the way you've tailored things because it is so much more than just recording the interview, isn't it?
much more, as you very well know.
Yeah. Well, my show doesn't tend to go out. It tends to go out still audio. It goes out live initially on the channel, but that does mean that I can wear my shorts and a t-shirt sometimes. And but actually, with the video, you've got to dress up, haven't you? You've got to look presentable.
Yes, people might not realize what a big deal that is. However, it is because I remember back to the audio days, I didn't have to have on any makeup if I didn't want to. I could have on a t-shirt. It didn't matter. And of course, being brand representative, when you're on video, I make an effort to look decent.
Yeah. Like I can imagine over all of those 500 interviews, there must have been so many kind of memorable standout moments. And you must have heard hundreds of stories. You get lots of insights from people. Are there any sort of moments or standout experiences that really stick in your mind that you'd love to share with people today?
I have a number of guests that I'd like to mention because I think that they're awesome. All of my guests, by the way, are phenomenal, and there'll be many that I'm not going to mention and many categories that I'm not going to mention. However, I'd like to share different categories of guests. And so I'll start with a couple of them, and then you and I can pause and talk about those and move on. But one category would be military guests. And the reason why this category is so important to me is because, I was an Army officer back in the day. And so I still have a real appreciation for military people. So one guest that fits into that category is a retired colonel from the Air Force who's also a psychologist, and his name is Dr. Carol Green. And he worked with, when he was in the military, elite military units. If you've heard of like people like the Navy SEALs, the Army Special Forces, the Air Force Commandos, or the Marine Raiders, this is the kind of population that he worked with, figuring out the best way to do selection and training and the special skills that are necessary for those jobs. It's not for everyone. And we applied that information to business executives, corporate executives as well, because that job is not for everyone as well. So I love talking to him, and that's episode number 136 if you want to look it up. And then another military person that I talked to was Captain Shauna Barber, and she was the first soldier who was crowned Miss USA. And this is while she was active duty in the Army. So she was balancing the duties of being a commander and also a beauty queen. And she leveraged her platform to really talk about an important issue, which is post-traumatic stress disorder for soldiers, and to really get a lot of support for that. So love that episode. That's an interesting and unique combination. And that's episode number 145. And then the third person in the military category is Lori Rowdy Drowdy. And Lori was in the Navy, and she was one of the first women to be a combat aviator, to be in a combat unit. And that was pretty special. She's been on the show a couple of times talking about supersonic leadership and also talking about Soar into Joy based on two books that she's written. And so her episodes are number 223 and 447. So Laurie Drowdy was a wonderful guest as well. So that's my military crew. Anything you want to say about them before I move on to the
I
next
was,
group?
yeah, I was just going to ask actually, if you're thinking about those three interviews, is there something, a message, a lesson, an insight that kind of really stands out from interviewing those people? That you mentioned that you're sharing this with a business audience. Is there something?
Well, I think with all of them, there is the commitment to do the hard work. And when I think about Lori Drowdy in particular, she's in a predominantly male environment. And what she had to do to change her messaging such that she's part of that crew and she's a valued member of the crew, and to speak the language that they speak was an important aspect. And for the most part, Army people are not in beauty contests. And so I think that Shauna Barber, one of the things she had to do was to deal with some pushback, because some people are like, well, what are you doing this for? And yet she showed the value of it, even for the military, because she had a broader platform to really talk about military issues. And I think with Carol Green, my colleague from the Air Force as a psychologist, it's just the reminder that every job, every position requires important skills. We are all gifted in different ways. So that doesn't mean that we all can be interchangeable cogs in the wheel or the process, because we may not be gifted for that particular thing, and that's okay.
Mm. You just brought one thing up for me actually from the military people I've interviewed, because I would really agree with those points you've made there. But one thing a reflection I've had is how well the military they plan very carefully, but they also review very carefully as well.
Yes.
And they extract every learnings that they can from a situation or a sortie, I remember interviewing the second female fighter pilot from the UK, and it just reminded me in business why we don't do that. We just move on to the next thing and the next thing, and we don't access all those lessons and gems and learning.
Well, on my show, we've talked about that many times, and we call them after action reviews. And I actually do practice that with my clients because I saw the value of it when I was in the military. And it's just a wonderful thing to do. So you really learn the lessons before you move forward.
What other sectors have you interviewed people in that's kind of stand out where there's been memorable moments?
Well, I'll mention some guests that I'll refer to as celebrity guests of sorts, meaning that people who are listening, they may know some of these names and the people that I'm talking about. And one such person was Daphne Maxwell Reid, and she's an actor. So she was on the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air television show for a number of years, playing the role of Aunt Vivian. And when she was interviewed on my show, she had finished Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, but she has lots of other talents as a photographer, an artist, a clothing designer. Very interesting person in interviews. So she's one of the people. I'd also mention Sandra Yancey, who's the founder and CEO of eWomen Network. And eWomen Network spans across a number of countries, the US, Canada, Australia, the UK. She's got 500,000 women who she is developing to become $1 million and beyond business entrepreneurs and owners. And so that's her passion. And she's really moving forward on that. So Sandra Yancey, I would put out there. I also would mention Howard Bahar, who is the founding international president of the Starbucks organization. He's also a former board member, and he talks about his secret sauce to grow the people in the organization. And one of his books is called It's Not About the Coffee. And I think that's important in terms of leading a business. You get everything done through the people, and so you better invest in them. So that's one of the big messages from him. And then I would mention Brian Smith, who is the founder of UGG boots, which I love UGG boots. They're so comfortable and wonderful, the natural linings of sheepskin and so on. He's from Australia, and that's one of the staples in Australia. And he had a vision to bring those boots to the United States. Now, I'll tell you, his book, The Birth of a Brand, is one of my favorite business books of all time, where he really talks about that journey, how difficult it was to have and hold the vision, even in hardship, and to persist until the company was successful and he was able to do a profitable exit. So, love Brian Smith. He's great. And then the last one I'll mention in the celebrity category is Deke Copenhaver, and I met him through you, and he was the former mayor of Augusta, Georgia. And he was leading at a time when the races were very divided and separated in Georgia, and people were just kind of divided in general. And he ran on a platform to really unite the city around a common cause. And one of my favorite parts of his story is that the grandfather of soul, James Brown, he endorsed him, and a lot of Black voters came out and voted for Deke. And he is still active in Augusta and respected by so many people across all the different aisles because he really made a difference.
Thank you for your generosity as well, because you introduced me to both Howard and Brian, and both of those individuals enriched me as well as my audience. So I'm pleased you enjoyed Deke
Oh,
too.
yes,
Um,
absolutely.
it's because these people they deserve to be shared when they've had such rich experiences, don't they? And
Oh,
so much value.
absolutely.
Yeah. Brian was and Howard were great. Is there any more moments before
I
we
do
move on
have,
to
yeah,
yeah?
I have a number of them. So I'm going to share this group, which I'll call the Christian Marketplace CEOs. I've had a number of CEOs on the show. Not all of them have necessarily been Christian. These came from a Christian direction, and I want to mention them. Tim Hare was one of the Christian CEOs, and he's the CEO of Sarah Ventures, which is a venture capital organization. And I've worked a lot with venture capital people, and I know they can be really cutthroat, dog eat dog. And in his case, He really ran the company and he runs the company based on Christian values. And he creates a win-win opportunities for the venture capitalist, for the entrepreneur, and also for the consumer. And he's successful using the Christian values. So that's what I really loved about him. And then Fred Sievert, I interviewed him in a part one and part two interview. He's the former president of New York Life, and he too used Christian values. And New York Life is a Fortune 100 company. And he was able in that secular marketplace to inspire people, to make a difference, to mentor people in the company. And even though he's retired, he still mentors people. That's his passion. And he brings his Christian values to the table. I'd also like to mention Michael Chapman, who's the CEO of the Community Foundation, and he's also known as the Christian beer man, the black hippie, and the love leader, because he did work for a beer company in his secular roles and jobs. But he brings all of who he is and all of that even to the Community Foundation, which is raising funds in South Florida. So that's him. And then Chandran Thomas. Chandran Thomas was listed as one of the 75 most influential Black people on Wall Street. He was a top executive. He was previously the CEO of Northern Trust Asset Management, and he worked for Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, all the big wheels. And he lived out his Christian values even on Wall Street. So that's to me pretty amazing. And then the last person I'll mention in the Christian CEO category is Neil Frick, who is the CEO of Cybercore Technologies. And he talks about the return on investment of having empathy in the corporation and in the business. And his book, The E-Suite, is all about empathetic leadership for the next generation of leaders. And he has grown a company that works to do government contracts at the federal level, often known as dress right, dress not too warm and fuzzy. And he's figured out a way to really invest in his people and to make a difference and to grow the company. So those are some of the ones that I would mention as well.
Amazing, amazing. Well, you've mentioned about 2% of your show guests probably in that, so they should all be very pleased. I hope to have had a little mention because they've really stood out. So I love to hear the last group that you mentioned there, leaders with Christian values. It is really great to know that at the top of some of our large organizations are people who have really good values and engender, Christian principles, engender attitudes and behaviors that really engage and things like empathy, which are just so important. So it's great. It's good to hear. It gives you encouragement in a world that can seem a little bit challenging right now. So tell me about listeners. Do you have any experiences with listeners who've maybe come back to you about a podcast and shared feedback? Sometimes they can be the silent partner in podcasting.
Yes, they don't always say things, and sometimes you really don't know who's out there, who's listening, and what impact a podcast may be having on someone. I'll mention two people in particular, and then I'm going to share a little story too that I think highlights the importance of this. There was a person who was feeling kind of down and feeling kind of depressed, and maybe thinking about even being suicidal. And we did a show that addressed some of those kinds of issues. And that's not a topic that I routinely talk about, rarely would talk about
Mm.
that. And I'm thinking, thank God this person listened. They reached out to me, let me know how much the show meant to them. And it was a lifesaver for that particular person. So we
Wow.
had that one. Then there was another person who had been experiencing a number of deaths and losses and close members of the family. And we did an episode that was related on grief and loss and just getting through some things. And they wrote back and said how meaningful that was and how they benefited. And then others sometimes they'll write in or talk to me in person if they see me somewhere and say, I listen to the show and it provides spiritual encouragement for me every day. And I didn't even know they were listening. So,
Yeah.
you have that, like you said, the silent audience out there. And the story I want to share is not really related to the podcast, but it's how I understand the value of the podcast. And this story comes from back in the day when I was in the military and I was stationed at West Point. And when I arrived at my unit, it was near Halloween, and I had not checked into the unit yet. So nobody knew me except for the people in my direct office, which was the Center for Leadership and Personal Development. Now, at the time, my name was Wilson. My boss's name was Wilson also. So we had two Dr. Wilsons over there, Wilson and Wilson, but nobody knew that I was there. So he asked me to be the fortune teller at the Halloween party. And I didn't even have my clothes yet, in terms of delivery up to New York, but I assembled some stuff. I had on my fortune teller outfit. He created a crystal ball for me that I could press a button and it would light up. And I had all of these artifacts, I call it. It might be a little bag of rice, a bag of dried beans. And so people would come during the night and they would ask questions. And I would give them my little test, my little assessments, and then I would speak into their life, whatever I was saying. I hadn't been there very long before I realized, oh, these are real questions that people have. These are real issues. And because I am a psychologist, I said, okay, this is not just fun and games. Let me make sure that I am sharing something with this person that will make a difference and that will benefit their life. And so the next day, because people didn't, later in the party, it was announced that I was the new psychologist, Dr. Wilson, with the other Dr. Wilson. And the next day, one of the guys who I talked to, he was an officer in the unit, he came by my office. He did not believe that I was really the new psychologist. And he saw me there, I was in my uniform, dressed like an army person. And he was like, wow, he was shocked. And then later, when I had to report to the general to say, I'm here on duty, you go in the office and you salute and say, hi, I am. And that's all I said. I am. He said, I know who you are. He had been one of the people at the party as well. So I just simply say, you don't know what a change or difference you make by a simple word that you say, or how you could destroy someone by saying the wrong thing. So I take it very seriously because I don't know who's out there and who may need that word of encouragement.
You'll never know the full impact of the ripples that the show makes. Though occasionally you probably get moments where you're meeting people, you're out there with clients, and people come up to you and say, "Listen to that one, listen to that one." I often get more verbal feedback quite
Yes,
often than notes, but when they do come, it's lovely to hear from
that's
people.
true.
So
Yeah,
do when you're listening to these, do send a note if you can to Dr. Karen and tell her, how the show has made you feel and maybe the insights that you've learned, because often people fear doing that, but it means so much when you receive them. So you're not wasting anybody's time by doing that. Actually, we do so love to get that feedback from you, and any ideas and insights we can learn and get even better at what we do. So I'm sure
that's
you'd
so
agree.
true. Thank you for saying that. Yes.
So I'm really intrigued too. We've talked about some of the memorable moments and impact on listeners. You reflected on some of the intentions for the show at the outset and explained that the format had changed. But I'm kind of interested because having all these conversations, and you've had this one is your 500th on the show, which is an incredible number. You must have changed to all of those experiences, to all of those insights with people. So tell me a little bit about how this has influenced your own personal growth.
Well, you cannot help but grow when you are connecting with just wonderful people. So the first thing I would say, I've just grown my connections and my network. I've always been a global person in terms of my business. I've met a number now of additional global people and colleagues, including you, Chris, through this process of podcasting. And so I find it rich in that respect. I've refined and expanded even my own thinking about leadership just by being exposed to different points of view and different perspectives. And I've been inspired to think of even more creative ways to think about leadership and to share the content with other people. So it's like the ongoing daily university of life. That's how I might describe it. Hi, this is Dr. Karen, dropping into today's show to remind you that one of the most important roles of an executive leader is to quickly make big and right decisions for the business. Are you looking for an experienced and trusted advisor to come alongside you as a thinking partner as you make those decisions? Then contact me at Dr. Dr. Karen, Karen at transleadership.com. Now, back to the show.
Do you find, I mean, I'm intrigued about, for example, hosting a podcast, how it impacts things like your communication skills. Do you think that you've evolved during that journey? I know I certainly have during mine. Do you think you've learned things about connecting, communicating, engaging with others, emotional, intelligent type things?
I'll start with this. Because I do the writing for my podcast, I have definitely become a much better writer. And it's amazing because I was not a bad writer before. However, I'm a better writer as a result of doing the writing work. I also think that I have developed my own unique style in how I interview my guests. And so, what my guests often say is how much they appreciate the way in which I am speaking with them. They feel comfortable, they feel at ease, and they share sometimes more than they ever imagined that they would share in that context because of being in the comfortable, I would say, living room environment. So that's something I've developed along the way. I have been public speaking for a long time, and I used to also do a segment in the morning news for a number of years, way back before I started a podcast. However, what was easier about that is it was live. There were people there that I was talking to. So again, I wasn't just, speaking to the to the camera or the microphone or whatever in that sense.
Do you think that when it comes to communication over, for example, Zoom and video, we're a long way away. I'm in Leicestershire in England, which is I don't know how many thousands of miles away from you in snowy Colorado at the moment. But actually, something I have kind of learned through this experience is that I think through this kind of medium, you can actually build a lot of engagement and energy between two people, and you feel it, even though you're a long way away. And I often have clients, for example, say, "Oh, I don't like being on Zoom. I don't like having conversations, particularly over the telephone, and they're cold and they're impersonal." But actually, there's a skill to bringing that warmth to it.
Absolutely. And my guests often talk about that. They'll talk about how they didn't feel the nervousness that they thought they were going to feel. They talk about how it made it easy for them. So they didn't really have to do a lot of work. They just had to show up. And then they're surprised by how fast the time goes.
Yeah.
And they say, wow, it was just like being in the living room because they worry that they're going to have to do all this work. I said, no, that's my job. I'm going to do the work. You don't have to do the work.
And looking back over those interviews, are there any sort of consistent messages that come up?
Several things, Chris, that I think are consistent across a number of guests in particular, because we haven't always done guest interviews, but since we have started doing them, people talk about the purpose and the calling on their life and why they're doing what they're doing. And that's a big theme about purpose and calling. They also talk about what I would call how God uses the dark threads of the tapestry. There may have been significant hardships or challenges or tragedies or difficulties, and all of that is still part of the beautiful tapestry of their life that God weaves together. And it kind of goes with a Bible verse that says all things work together for good to those who love God and are called according to his purposes. So there's that. And then I would say that every part of their journey is used, and every part of their journey is preparing them for the chapter today and the chapter tomorrow. So God doesn't waste anything, he uses it all. And then the last thing I would say is that there's that real interplay between the gifts that the person has, the God-given gifts, and how they answer the call to leadership in the marketplace and persist in answering that call until they achieve the objectives that they're out there to achieve. So I would say those are just common themes that repeat over and over again.
That's really fascinating. And I'm just going back to the challenges that people go through in terms of problems in life, because often people see problems and it can get them down. They could go on a sort of downward spiral. It might be a health issue, it might be a work issue, it could be a relationship issue. But what you're saying is that actually nothing is wasted. That actually there's maybe a reason that these situations have happened. Is there, do you have a feeling that we should accept in life that challenges are going to happen, and actually it's a each of them are a learning opportunity?
I would definitely say that. And one question that I would encourage people to ask themselves is how can what has happened, even if it's something dreadful, how can it be for me? And that's a hard question to answer when it's
Yeah,
something difficult. And not only how can it be for me, how can it be for someone else when I later share with them how I got through it and what I learned in the process. And so often people ask the question, well, why did this happen? Why me kind of thing? And a better question is, what am I to learn, derive, and gain and use from this experience?
that's lovely. I think there's a quote by Rumi, and it goes along the lines of live life as though it's rigged in your favor.
Yeah,
Which,
that does fit with what I'm saying.
yeah.
Yeah. People have a hard time with this. Well, my best friend was just killed in a car crash or my baby died or whatever. How can that be for me? And yet, if you reflect on it long enough and sit before God long enough, He will show you how.
There's something to learn, isn't there?
Yeah, it's something to learn. It
Grow.
doesn't come
Yeah.
naturally.
No, and those situations can be horrible. However, they can later on they can bring so much strength and support to others going through something similar.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, you become very able to be very empathic in
Hmm.
that sense. So, how about we were talking about problems and challenges there. How about you with the show? Sometimes there must have been hurdles. Things must have gone wrong. It can't have always gone perfectly. Um, well, have you got any sort of major challenges that you've faced while producing this that you've had to overcome, and what kept you going?
Oh, there've been lots of challenges along the way. I mean, even something as simple as getting guests who are in my target market. Because my target market is corporate executives, and particularly those who are executives of Christian faith, but who are working in a non-Christian context. And corporate is very cautious and traditional, and they don't often want their CEOs speaking on a podcast and certainly not talking about any Christian reflection.
Yeah.
So that's been a difficult thing to do. And so I've often had to really draw from those executives who are retired because they don't have to worry about, someone breathing down their neck about what they're saying. And then I realized I had to expand even my view of who could be guests. For example, entrepreneurial CEOs and leaders, they also have lessons to share that apply to the corporate executives. I've found that some pastors who I've had on my show have been wonderful guests, also have messages to share with the audience. And then artists, people who are musicians, people who are authors, people who are painters, like, Lewis Parsons, who this is his painting, right behind me. And I went through his soulscaping experience, which was phenomenal for us to create this corporate painting that has meaning for us. So there are lots of people that can speak into the lives of the executives. So I think sourcing guests was hard. I think as I had more and more episodes, it became a little easier because people were starting to look for me. So that was one of the things that was great. The other thing that was real hard for the show, and this has still not been solved, is finding a podcast writer other than myself. And the reason why that's challenging is the person has to be able to pay attention to detail because there's a lot behind the scenes that's very detail oriented. and they also have to have a creative bent. And it's difficult to find those two qualities in the same person. And I am still looking because I truly believe that there are people out there who do this better than I do, and I just got to find them. So that's still on my list. I'm not giving up, not giving up. And in fact, what's really kept me on track is the wonderful team that I do have. I have a great team of people that span all the way from California to New York and various stops in between who work behind the scenes tirelessly every week doing their part of making sure that this podcast is launched and it comes out every week on the right day. Sometimes we've had technical glitches and it might come out later, but it's out. So I'm very thankful for my wonderful team, and they believe in what I'm doing as well.
Brilliant. And do you have any advice for anybody who is thinking about starting a podcast?
Well, first of all, and as you and I were saying not too long ago, that it's more than just creating content. Yes, you have to create content, but it'll take far more resources of time and energy and love than you ever imagined. And I would also say that in addition to creating content, there's the marketing aspect of it that's so important, making sure that the podcast is in the right channels to be in front of people. So before you launch and start, make sure you understand that, how to look at stats related to your podcast, knowing how you're putting it out into the workplace and the marketplace, because many people don't know that. We didn't know a lot of things on that end when we started either. So I would share that with people. And then thirdly, I would say it takes a team. I mentioned I have a team from coast to coast, California to New York, and trying to do it all yourself, unless you're a full-time podcaster, which I'm not. I'm a full-time business person who is a consultant. And so this is on top of my full-time consulting load that I also do a podcast. So remember, you've got to hire team members, you got to have them to help. And then I would say it's a commitment. If you want your podcast to be successful, you have to commit to creating the content, being consistent, and showing up on whatever day you say you're going to show up and doing the work. And so I've seen a lot of podcasts that have maybe 5 or 6 episodes. You don't see anything more after that because they probably didn't count the cost on the front end to know what it took, and then they gave up. So
Yeah.
I would encourage people understand A to Z what you're getting into and then go for it.
Yeah, love that. And I think we're probably part of quite a unique set of people across the globe who've produced over 500 podcasts. It really is a feat. And the one thing I would sort of say with that is once you start to hit these numbers of consistency, there's a huge amount of credibility that it gives you when people realize that you're serious and that you're you keep on going and going and going, even when times are challenging. You get a lot of respect for that, and you deserve a lot of respect for this consistency and keeping it going. So you're the kind of person that if I was when I was working in corporate roles, you were the kind of person that I would need support from, somebody who's demonstrated that they have that commitment and can stick with things. And you demonstrate that in spades. It's incredible.
Thank
So
you.
shall we move onto the next chapter now? What's coming next? You've reached this milestone. What excites you most about the future of the podcast, and what can listeners look forward to next?
Yeah, let me create a slight context, and that is this. Our 500th episode aired on the 29th of October of this year, 24. And next year, I'll put a plug in for this on the 1st of April, we will be celebrating, my company will be celebrating its 30th birthday.
Wow.
I'm really excited about both of those activities. And so what I've done is I'm launching for 2025 what we're calling the Fab 500. In other words, in honor of the 500 episodes, we are going to re-air all during the year podcast episodes that I love and that I think are wonderful and that will still benefit people today and that many haven't heard because they may be new to my community and new to my environment. And so they'll be hearing them for the first time, and some of them have not yet been aired on television and iHeartRadio. And I didn't mention this, but we moved in iHeartRadio from once a week broadcasting of new episodes on Thursday to we now broadcast Monday through Friday. So that's a lot of opportunity for us to showcase our guests and to really demonstrate the great work that they are doing. And that's really important to us to really showcase the guest. So during this Fab 500 year, I'm looking for additional ways to repurpose the content so that they are showcased even more. And I also am committed to finding my what we call the PWP, which is the podcast writing partner. So I'm definitely going to do that. So that's kind of like at the big picture level. And then I also have some things as kind of like a personal focus, if you will, for next year as well. Every year, we do have a word of the year. And so I'm going to just give people advance notice because the word of the year for next year is expansion. And the word of the year for 2024 was light, love, and life as the words. And that's really important because we're in some dark times coming out of the pandemic and everything else, and people needed light. And I called it a trifecta of light and love and life. So that was important too. And the word of the year for 2023 was possibilities. And we've had some years where we created kind of like an acronym. I called it VIA for vision and for impact and abundance. And VIA led to possibilities. Also, I'm planning to do a lot more public speaking, a lot more keynotes, to guest on other people's podcasts, and to do a lot more writing and reading myself in other venues, to do more press releases and some business development work. That's how I plan to spend a lot of this time, and I'll have a little bit more free time than what I'm accustomed to.
Excellent. So a lot coming up. It doesn't sound like free time. It sounds like you're going to fill that time quite easily with other things. But what you got me thinking about there was podcasts, almost like songs,
Mhm.
and an artist would would never create a song and not play it again, would they?
Yes, exactly. We already run some things from the archives once a week on our social media channels on Wednesdays, and people are hearing them for the first time. So I know that there are people who haven't heard these because people will say, "Oh, we heard the podcast on," and I said, and to start talking about it, well, that's not this week's podcast. They were listening to something from the archives. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So could people, yeah, if you went to a concert and you didn't hear the favorite songs of the artist, you would be disappointed. I remember going once to see many years ago to see David Bowie, and he decided he wasn't going to play any of his old songs. He was only going to play new ones. I think he played Under Pressure was the only one he played, and the audience was quiet all the way through. And I think it didn't last for the next tour, I don't think.
No, because people are there for the body of work that they know, love, and appreciate.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So, thinking about trans leadership, then, and you said you're going to do more keynotes. You're going to do more work with clients, and you're going to spend some more time marketing. What kinds of clients do you particularly enjoy working with? Who really excites you when you have this opportunity to work with them and help them and develop them and support them with their work?
I love working with clients who are they're mission oriented, purpose led. They care about not only what they do, but how they do it. And in that group are people who have really core values that resonate with me, and also the Christian executives who are in a secular, business place and who want to benefit the company and the people in the company because of those values that they hold. So those people who really have an appreciation for that biblical lens, like I said, on life and leadership, I love working with people like that because I can bring extra to the people who want to work in that way. It's really exhilarating for me.
So, how do people best reach you when they're listening to something like this and they want to have a conversation?
Well, the best way they can get a hold of me, they can reach me on Dr. Karen, Dr. period Karen at transleadership.com. So that's probably the quickest way because I'm traveling and out and about, but they'll be able to reach me there.
Fantastic. And Dr. Karen, do you have any sort of words of wisdom that you'd like to leave us with? Any final messages for your community of corporate business executives who listen to this show typically?
Yes, I do have some final words, but there's something else I want to share too,
Hmm.
before I get to the final words, and that is this: the way that I work with my clients is significant too, because not everyone works in the same way. And I do want to share this because I often don't get to talk about it. And these are some of the things that clients love about what I do. So I like to build on their strengths because what I know is that they can leverage those strengths even to build bridges across the flat sides and to get to different places. And whatever their strengths are, these are the gifts that make up what I call their creative advantage in the marketplace. So that's a core way that I work. I also like to discover and leverage possibilities and options that they're not thinking about and that have not occurred to them. And so many of my clients love this because I'm bringing perspectives to them that they hadn't considered and that are really important to take into account. I'm also very systems oriented. So when I'm working with a single executive, even, we're always thinking about the enterprise. We're thinking about the business as a whole. And the systems informed approach helps me to say how one thing might affect another thing and ways that we can use levers for change in the organization. So I love that. And then as I work with them, I model a process that they can also use for how to work with their people and their organization. So, one of the things they say is they know that I deeply care about them and hold them in a space of caring. And from that, they're able to step into the hard places, the difficult places, and to really be successful. And sometimes, if you're not holding people in a place of caring, they won't take the risks that they need to take in order to be successful. So that's important. And then I would say we practice real conversations that that executive will have soon that are coming up so that when they go live, we've already looked at what could happen and they are prepared for what they are going to do, how they're going to respond. So I think the practice is crucial. Sometimes they don't always like the practice, but on the back end, they'll tell me what value it was for them.
I like that idea of spending time practicing,
Yeah,
preparing,
absolutely.
getting ready. That's
Well,
brilliant.
think about elite athletes. That's what they do.
Yeah. No, they've got to train, haven't they, for the big moments?
Absolutely. There's no question.
Yeah. I'll come back to my question again then. Any sort of final, after all of that, which is brilliant. Any final sort of words of wisdom before I hand back to you and you can share a beautiful Bible reading and finish off.
Yes, and what I'd like to share with everyone who's listening is a concept out of my book, Lead Yourself First. And it's the whole notion that before you lead others, you have to do some work on you.
Yeah.
Okay, you have to do some work on you. And it's out of the notion that you are the instrument of your leadership, all out of that notion. So, what I want to say to each person out there is that you are a beautiful instrument. And we could talk about instruments as musical instruments. They could be medical tools like a scalpel or whatever. But today I'm going to focus on the musical aspect and I'm going to say this beautiful instrument that you are and that God has created and gifted has been designed to play the music that only you can play. So, since you are the instrument of your leadership, I would say tune up and ensure that you play the notes in such a way that your organization hears in a crystal clear way what that message means and what action they are to take as a result of the music that you're playing. And then when you play together and everybody brings their instruments to the table, then with your people, you can create some beautiful and harmonic music that achieves the mission and purpose of your organization and for which you have been called. So I would say take that seriously.
Yeah.
Be the instrument of your leadership.
Wow. Well, what a pleasure to have the opportunity to spend this time with you, reflecting on 500 episodes. It's an incredible achievement. I fully applaud you and thank you for your incredible contribution that you make to others and to the world. All that effort, energy as well in producing this show, and all the extra work you do in addition to, and this is not paid work working for clients. This is actually, heartfelt work because you care about contributing to a better world. So I applaud you.
Thank you so much, Chris. And I applaud you as well because we are both birds of a feather flocking together in a sense that we really do care about people. We care about the world that we live in, and we know that we are called to make a difference. So thank you for making the difference that you make with your clients, with your podcast, and with the collective, which is a phenomenal group of world changers. So I really applaud you for all of that. And thank you for being here today to have this conversation with me to celebrate the 500 episodes. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Hey.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So today, in just closing today's show, what I would like to just share is that 500 episodes does not happen by accident. I would say God's in the mix. He's the one that's led and empowered me to be able to do it. And my team members are in the mix. I thank all of my team members who are working so tirelessly every week behind the scenes to make sure that this happens. And so I would give a shout out to them because they're unsung heroes. People don't see their faces, they don't hear their names, but they're there and they're making a difference. And I could not do it without them. I want to thank you, the listeners, because I could not do it without you either. And my wonderful guest, thank you for sharing your knowledge, your experience, and your wisdom as well. And so the verse I want to close on is Psalm 69 and verse 30. And it says, I will praise the name of God with a song and will magnify him with thanksgiving. So sing a beautiful song to the Lord today and magnify him with thanksgiving. This pilgrim journey, I want Jesus to walk with me. Hi, this is Dr. Karen Wilson Starks, President and CEO of Trans Leadership Incorporated. Did you know that workplaces can make a significant difference in the lives of people and that you can create a positive culture that gets positive business results and also produces positive life experiences for your employees and your clients and customers? You can make a significant contribution to the world by creating the kind of culture where your people can bring their gifts to provide the most relevant and excellent products and services to your marketplace. What the research shows is that companies with excellent leadership are also more profitable. So as you flourish and as you grow in the world, you can do more for yourself as well as for others. So if this is resonating with you and you want to create a positive, profitable, and powerful corporate culture, and you care about succession, leaving the organization in a better position than when you found it, do keep in mind that that kind of legacy is something that's intentional. And I am happy to partner with you to take your organization to the next level and create that positive leadership culture. So reach me at Dr. Karen, at transleadership.com. You've been listening to The Voice of Leadership with me, Dr. Karen Wilson Starks. And I want to give a special thanks to jazz saxophonist Ron McMillan for granting us permission to use his gifted music on our show. Thanks for listening, and remember to go to my website, transleadership.com, for more strategies, insights, and leadership resources.